Welcome back to Season 2 of the Sweet Taste of Balance podcast series. I am your host, Dr Idrees Mughal, and today's episode is Truth versus Myth Nutrition Edition. Today, I'm here with Laura Clark.
Hello.
How's it going?
Yeah, good, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thank you.
Good.
So before we jump into all things nutrition myths and debunking, which I love, why don't you give a little bit of introduction as to who you are and what it is you do?
So I'm a registered dietitian, and I have been one of those now for about 25 years. And I think in that time, I've seen a huge shift in people initially coming to see me because they needed information and knowledge. And now, of course, we are surrounded by information, but everything contradicts everything else. And so I think we're heading into overwhelm and people are lacking clarity on the right thing to do by their health. I spend a lot of my time debunking myths and helping people find that path forward that's right for them and their body.
I love how you touched on there's been a change in the reasons why people are coming to you, right?
Yeah.
It so nicely summarizes the issue. There's this lovely quote that I heard at a recent lifestyle medicine conference, which was the information paradox, right? And it's like, we are so overwhelmed with information, but we don't know which information is the correct information, right? So it's like in the era of where information is accessible on everyone's mobile device with a click of a button. You can even talk to your phone and get information, right? Now with AI, it's like, why are more and more people becoming more confused in an era where information is readily accessible? And that just simply comes down to, I believe, is that misinformation outweighs factual information by a huge factor. Are you familiar with, there was a study in 2023 by Dublin City University in conjunction with MyFitnessPal, where they analysed something like 67,000 TikTok videos, related to health, and they found like 2% was accurate.
Yeah, it was 2.1%, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's like
was in
1
line
in
with
50,
public guidance.
imagine that.
Yeah.
1 in 50 health videos
Yeah.
are going to be scientifically sound and the rest are going to be nonsense.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, why don't we dive into some
Let's do
nutrition myths?
Let's do it.
So I think the first one, very topical. I've seen it a lot online. I'm sure you have as well. The topic of dairy versus non-dairy milks, right? So there's this whole topic of conversation around oat milk, almond milk, soy milks, right? Some people say, like Glucose Goddess, for example, she will say things like, oat and almond milk and soy milk, they're terrible because all they do is, it's basically, she's called it starch sugar before. It's just starch sugar, right? It's just glucose in a solution that causes a massive glucose spike. And other people, some people in the plant-based, side of online creators, they'll say that actually they're superior compared to normal milk. So where do you lie on this side of the conversation?
Well, I think context is king, isn't it, in this scenario? Because I don't think we really need to pit plant-based milks against dairy with the aim of bringing one out on top. I think the reality is it's down to the individual and what their preferences are. So the first thing to note is plant-based milks are entirely different in their nutritional composition to dairy milk, with the exception perhaps of soya milk, which is the most similar nutritionally to cow's milk. But a lot of plant-based milks have very, very low levels of protein. And a protein in dairy can be a significant contributor of protein to the diet.
Yeah.
And plant-based milks have to be fortified to get the essential minerals that you would naturally find in dairy. So things like calcium and iodine, for example. And if you're choosing an organic plant-based milk, then it can't legally be fortified. So you are going to be missing out potentially on some really important minerals for bone health. So in making a switch to plant-based milks because the perception is that they're healthier than dairy, I don't think that that's true. But for some people, they want to choose plant-based milks because, for example, they might have a lactose intolerance and plant-based milks are naturally lactose-free. So they might be suitable for some people, those that want to have an entirely plant-based lifestyle. But you've still got to think about what that milk is doing in the context of the rest of your diet. Because, for example, if you choose almond milk as an alternative milk at breakfast time, you might then end up with a breakfast that's really, really low in protein. So almond milk isn't really a milk at all. It's got virtually no protein in it. So you've got to consider the context of how they fit into the rest of your diet.
Right. So would you say including let's say an almond milk or an oat milk as part of your daily drink consumption, for example, would you say that there's inherent harm in that or not?
Not really. I think, again, it comes down to taste preferences as well, doesn't it? So some people really like the taste of an oat milk latte, for example, or
I had one today.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Or almond milk, in a smoothie or whatever it might be. So there's nothing inherently unhealthy about that. But I do think people need to be aware that even though they're coming under the category of quote unquote milk, they are very different to the nutritional composition of standard cow's milk.
That's a fascinating point there. I think, as they're marketed as a direct substitution, despite not having identical nutritional profiles, right? So I think that's a very key point. It's like, if you're going to do it for moral, ethical, or, digestive related reasons, then, try to make sure that you're consuming a balanced meal where that's not making up the bulk of your meal, right?
Yeah.
So that's a brilliant point. Now, moving on to a slightly different but also similar topic in the way of plant oils, right? So there has been previously, not so much in recent years, but previously with certain fads and trends of a hype around coconut oil, right? So they've been, touted as being very beneficial for things like keto coffee, right? Like even skincare routines. Some people say that they're much more beneficial to use in cooking because of the whole conversation around, vegetable oils and oxidized oils when you heat them.
Yeah, safety.
Safety and stability of the coconut oil. So what is the hype around coconut oil and how much truth do you think there are in those kind of statements?
Yeah, it's certainly a nutrient that has developed, or so should I say a food that's developed a bit of a health halo, hasn't it, really? And I think it's important to dig into the research around that and what we actually know about coconut oil, because fundamentally it does contain around 90% saturated fat. And when we look at analysis that compares coconut oil to butter and to olive oil, we can see that coconut oil still does raise our LDL cholesterol, which is the cholesterol that we know connects to an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. I think it fares slightly better than butter, but it certainly doesn't fare better than unsaturated plant-based oils such as olive oil.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a Danish cohort study that looks at differing carbon chain lengths when it comes to saturated fatty acids. And actually, there's some evidence that different carbon chain lengths, particularly ones that are more abundant in animal foods and animal fats, they can have a more deleterious effect on our blood lipids and have a more potent effect on things like LDL cholesterol, right? Whereas plant-based sources of saturated fat, and even some in dairy, actually, to be fair, but also things, the carbon chain lengths found in coconuts, for example, they might be of a smaller composition, so smaller carbon chain lengths. So there's definitely some interesting conversation around different types of saturated fats. But what we do know is that when you take saturated fats as a whole, as you rightly said, it's going to cause a similar direction of effect, which is an increase in LDL cholesterol.
Yeah.
So it's a fascinating point. So would you say that if someone routinely is using something like a sunflower, rapeseed, or a vegetable oil to cook, right? Would you say that swapping gram for gram that amount of vegetable oil with coconut oil, is that going to have a net positive or a negative effect on health?
So to be clear, when we're heating unsaturated oils, that's perfectly safe to do in the home. They remain stable and safe for human consumption.
Yeah.
The challenge becomes when we're reheating multiple times unsaturated oils, they can start to denature and then are not as good for the body.
Like you get in deep fried takeouts, right?
Yeah, exactly. So for the general consumer in the home, they're not going to be doing that. So we have a decision to make. We need to be having predominantly unsaturated fatty acids in our diets, but we can have saturated fat in small quantities as well. So we get to decide. Now, personally, I like to get my saturated fat from chocolate. That's a huge love of mine. And therefore, I choose not to cook with coconut oil or to have lots of coconut milk or coconut cream in my recipes, because for me, I would rather get it from elsewhere. So it's about the balance, I think, between the two types of oils. But certainly, just because coconut oil has a slightly different makeup, you were talking about different lengths of fatty acids. So we know coconut oil has more of these medium chain triglycerides in it. And these are absorbed slightly differently, but still a coconut oil that you buy off the shelf is only going to have about 10 to 15% of these MCTs, these medium chain triglycerides. So again, we don't want to get sucked into this perception that it is therefore superior for our health, because we can quite clearly see that it isn't.
Yeah, I think, the research by my old research methods lecturer, Lee Hooper, fantastic nutrition researcher, in her meta-analyses of randomized control trials looking at how you adjust saturated fat intake and the reduction in cardiovascular events, it's like when you go above 9% of energy intake from saturated fats, then we see a huge increase in cardiovascular events, right? So as you rightly said, it's like we have a choice. In our 25 to 30 gram allowance of saturated fats before we start to see increases in risk, where do you want to get that from? And as you said, it comes from chocolate. I myself have gotten a liking to dark chocolate now, even though I never used to have that. So I do like that. I do try to prefer to cook with vegetable oils. And also there's a massive taste difference, like if I'm cooking an egg and I've put a tablespoon of olive oil versus vegetable oil versus coconut oil versus a different kind of fat, it's just going to be very different tasting. So taste preference also comes into it as well,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah. Makes a big difference to satisfaction.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And adherence to whatever dietary intervention you're trying to follow as well, right? So why don't we quickly touch on the also controversial topic, which I'm sure you've covered it many times as well. I've covered it probably over a dozen times now, kind of on my social media platforms. The controversial issue of non-sugar sweeteners. And they have been accused of causing pretty much everything from diabetes, obesity, stimulating appetite, cancer. I've seen some crazy things like, clinical depression, inflammatory bowel disease, some really, really wacky stuff out there.
Yeah.
Also destroying gut bacteria as well, of course.
Throw that into the mix.
Yeah. On top of all the other random outcomes, right? Are any of these, is there any metric on any of these claims where there is some truth to that kind of conversation? And can they be a useful tool for reducing people's sugar intake?
So sweeteners have been around some of them have been around for hundreds of years. They have been tested. We have absolutely no doubt that they are completely safe for human consumption. And even the acceptable limits that are, in black and white are still about 100 times less than what would be considered to be anywhere near harmful for humans. And a lot of the research that I think leads to these scaremongering statements comes from animal studies, where they're given vast doses of sweeteners in physiologies that are completely different to the human body. So I think we need to see globally just how well recognized sweeteners are in being completely safe and a part of an overall balanced diet.
Yeah.
So when we think about their role and their use, we can see that they either have a weight neutral effect or potentially might help somebody with weight loss if they're substituting out sugar for foods that contain sweeteners. But again, as I said, context is king. So we have to also think about the rest of that person's diet and their relationship with food and their general eating behaviors, because clearly sweeteners alone are not going to solve any weight-related problems that person may have. So they certainly have a a part to play. And if anybody is excessively consuming sweeteners, firstly, I would say that that's incredibly rare, as I say, to be getting anywhere near the levels that we would be thinking are high.
Yeah.
I would be more interested then in looking at the sorts of foods that that person eats. And if they're having excessive amounts of whatever, why are they doing that? What's the connection there? Is there an emotional connection to that food? What purpose is it serving for them within the context of their overall diets? Like that's more of an interesting conversation to me. And the microbiome stuff, I think, has come under the spotlight because we are doing more and more research, aren't we, into the gut microbiome, the role that the diversity of our gut bacteria play in protecting our health is exciting. It's interesting to see where that takes us. But again, if sweeteners do have any impact on the gut microbiome, it really seems to be at incredibly high doses, which again is not representative of the sorts of doses that you or I might be consuming in our day-to-day diets.
Yeah.
So I don't think we need to be blacklisting them or having any fear around them when we are, as I say, using them as part of an overall balanced diet.
Yeah. Now, a fascinating point where you mentioned at the beginning there is, the acceptable daily intakes. Not many people realize that even though they are ridiculously high anyway, which is, I think the European Food Safety Authority says, 40 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, right? Which ends up being something like, for the average 75 kilogram adult, 12 to 16 cans of a normal soft drink, right? A day. People don't realize that in order to derive an acceptable daily intake level, what they do is they factor in a safety factor of 100 to what's called the no observable adverse event or effect level in research. So just so people understand, in research, especially in rodents and preclinical trials, you will kind of give rodents or mice or pigs or whichever animal you're testing on the maximum threshold, and you will keep increasing the dose until they experience negative issues. Whatever that dose is, we then decrease that by a factor of 100, and that then becomes the acceptable daily intake. And the reason they do that is because researchers understand that we have different physiologies, right? So to be extra safe, we've got a safety factor of 100 times. So even the acceptable daily intake is not the dose tested that caused harm. It's 100 times lower. So I think people really need to understand
that's so well explained. Well done.
People need to understand how ridiculously high research has to give to these animals before any adverse effect was seen, right? So I think when people kind of comment on the acceptable daily intakes, they go, well, I'm already at 70% of that. And, who's to say I'm not going to cause harm from 70% of it? Well, actually, you're more than 100-fold off already, and you don't realize it, right? So so there's a massive margin of error even with the acceptable daily intakes. So fantastic points there about, context is king, of course. And, if your diet is comprised of nutritious food, minimally processed food, then having a bit of, non-sugar sweetener or even sugar in general is not really going to harm you.
I think we spend far too long fretting and worrying about what we think we should take out of our diets or what's, quote unquote, bad for us. And we don't spend enough time actually thinking about what we can put in our diets to help them balance out. To help them feel more nutritious. We spend far too much time putting things under the spotlight, like our sugar intake or fear around sweeteners, and we're wasting energy doing it that way around.
I'm not sure exactly what the stats are for UK, but I know in the US where we have a similar kind of palette to them, is that the average adult is getting around 10 to 12 grams of fiber a day. I think it's around 15 for UK adults, right? So we're already under half of what we should be getting. And then when it comes to fruits and veggie servings, we're already under half of that as well. And in America, it's even worse, where only 10% get the recommended 2.5 to 3 cups of veggies a day, and 12% get the recommended 3 to 4 servings of fruit a day. 10 and 12% of adults are are not even reaching the minimum recommended levels of basic foods like fruits and veggies. And of course, a lot of that comes down to systemic issues around food accessibility and affordability. 50 million Americans live in, a state of food insecurity. I know many UK households also live in a state of food insecurity. But it's like, we're focusing on the wrong things, right? If we can develop public health interventions that make it more accessible, more affordable, in conjunction with public health education about the importance of inclusion, not exclusion, there'll be such a dramatic shift in health. And as you rightly said, the topic shouldn't be focusing on taking out these all in all minute things that won't have much of an impact if you're not replacing them with, nutrient dense, minimally processed food. I just think this whole conversation about, a lot of these busting these nutrition myths often gets lost in the weeds. We need to step back out and focus on the bigger picture.
Well, it's the power of simple, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it's the kind of, I've identified one problem and this is why all my health problems arise. And that is almost like a marketing strategy as well. If an influencer can really harp on, I keep bringing this up, but they have it in the name, glucose goddess, right? And there's other people, keto queen or whatever kind of handle you want to have. They've made their whole identity this one thing that they've deemed a problem. And they're not stepping back and actually looking at the bigger picture. It's a fantastic conversation. I think, this episode could be 10 hours long if we really wanted it to.
Come back.
The topic of detox teas, right? There's a lot of speculation around people showing their personal anecdotes that, make this home remedy concoction and you'll get a flat stomach, you'll rid yourself of these bloating issues, almost cleanse yourself of toxins. And I've heard that word so many times, it's ridiculous. Do those statements have any merit, and where do you stand on detox teas?
I think the word detox and the idea that we can drink something that is quote unquote wholesome or natural, and that we have almost this visualization then of this sort of detoxifying process kind of happening through our bodies. It's incredibly appealing, isn't it? And the idea, of course, that we do have a liver and 2 kidneys, and these are detoxifying all of the time for us, 24/7.
Skin.
With no credit. They're just getting on with the job. That doesn't really sound as sexy, does it? And something that we can purchase in some pretty packaging that makes the claims is going to sound appealing. And we like the idea of that we're putting something in our bodies that is helping that process. But of course, it just doesn't stand up to scientific scrutiny when you really think about it. And I think when it comes to teas, some of them may come with some form of laxative in them. So that might then give the illusion of, a flatter stomach if actually they're having a partially sort of dehydrating effect on the body, or having an effect on bowel motions, for example. We know categorically that particular foods can't target particular areas of fat that we're wishing to lose on the body, belly fat, of course, being a common one. So we can't target particular areas of fat on the body by particular foods that we eat. Again, it all sounds very appealing, but that's just not the way it works. So sadly, they are an idea behind this buy now culture of kind of, this is minimal pain for huge gains. But it just, the marketing hype just doesn't stack up when you actually look at how the body works.
Yeah, brilliant explanation. I think a lot of the conversation, some might push back, obviously I'm not saying this, but some might push back and say that, this concoction is supporting your organs to do their job. And it's like, well, based on what evidence, right? Like, yes, it's true that consuming a nutritious and nutrient-rich diet of lots of healthy foods is going to support your organs to function well. But your tea is not doing anything inherent that a diet is not going to do, like a normal dietary pattern is not going to do. So even that, when they want to push back with that aspect, it still doesn't hold up to kind of scrutiny, right? Thank you so much for your time. And there are so many myths that we could dive into. I hope this has been useful for the audience. And Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for tuning into this episode. If you have any queries or comments, please feel free to leave them below. And also, if you want more information about all things debunking nutrition myths, then feel free to search up menopause.dietitian on Instagram, and also Laura Clark's website, which is lecnutrition.co.uk, which is her consultancy website, and also my social media as well, Dr_Idrees on all major platforms.